a lot of parents just don't have the answers, right? You can't feel guilty about that. You just got to get educated. You don't want kids locked up forever. A lot of parents come in like, just take my kid, bring him back when they're 18. Or they send them to like lockdown boarding schools. 2/3 of the people get into the profession of therapy are doing so because they had trouble in their lives. And that's the wrong reason to do it. Because they're trying to work out their own issues and eventually they get burned out. You want to get rid of a kid for expressing the very same symptoms for which they're here for. Like, let's recognize this. We treat mental health issues.
Yeah.
So them expressing their mental health issues is not a problem. The question is a psychedelic helping you escape from a problem, or is it helping you address a problem?
Welcome back to the Tim Teaches podcast. I'm your host, Tim McCoy. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Mendi Baron, a licensed clinical social worker. Mendi is a nationally recognized expert psychotherapist and coach, providing mental health services to children, teens, and families. Currently, he serves as the CEO of Mariah Behavioral Health. He is a boxer, father of 5, musician, and cantor. Mendi, welcome to Tim Teaches.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. That's a long bio.
I chopped it up, man. It gets
That's
way longer
perfect.
than that. Yeah. I had to look up what a cantor is. I wasn't familiar with the term, and I'm like, oh man, that's
Interesting.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
cool, man. How long have you been doing that?
So my dad's a rabbi. I'm like the pastor's son kind of dude.
Oh
So
yeah.
I've been doing it since 13, I guess. That's
Wow.
been a minute.
Yeah, I'm also a pastor's son, so
Oh, there you go. So
yeah.
you can relate.
Totally. He never called on me to lead any prayers or anything. I don't know if I was in his vibe for the church, but I'm
Got
trying.
it.
I'm doing my best. So
Yeah, each
um
person does it the way
yeah,
they feel.
totally. So you're in the mental health space. That's kind of my jam. I like talking to people about that. You're specifically dealing with children, which is uh, huge and needed in this day and age. And so I'm excited to talk to you and kind of pick your brain and hear how you got into this. And so
Sure.
kind of let you just introduce yourself and what you're all about.
Sure. So my name is Mendi, as you mentioned. And social worker, psychotherapist. I think I work primarily with teens and kids, which is a challenging population. Because teens, they know everything, right? Nothing needs to be taught.
Yeah.
And a lot of people prefer to avoid sort of that crowd. But for me, I found that if you can make a difference at that age, you can change the trajectory in a major way. And
Mm,
to some extent, it's a cheat code because when you work with adults, you don't always get to see the results of what you're doing. And with kids and teens, you really can. And you really get the opportunity to see the results, which reinforces your work. And what got me into teens was being a pain in the butt teen.
yeah.
Um, got kicked out of a bunch of schools. But I found that even with my cohort of what rebels, if you will, or just kids who just misfits, I was the one who people came to for advice, for guidance. Um, and at some point, I actually met a social worker who said, you're actually impacting these people and you're helping them, and maybe you should pursue that. And that's sort of how it began for me.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, so my first kind of question would be, what age? So I have a somebody I know who is dealing with their son, and it's all bad right now, and he's going downhill. And this poor guy was adopted, so they got him at 3 years old, and it's
Sure.
just been nothing but troubles, and it's not getting any better. They have had him in therapy on all the medication, and it's like he's 15 years old now, and I'm wondering, like, what is the best avenue of approach, because he just got kicked out of school, and it's just rough.
Sure. Sure. So it's not a 1 foot salute. I could ask you some questions, but what
That's right.
part of the process is kind of looking at the presenting problem, right? A lot of times, for example, I'll get a kid, especially a teenage, who's acting out, who's kind of explosive, who the parents are sort of confused. So the question would be, was this always the case, or did it start as a teenager, for example? Um, One of the biggest sort of underlying issues I tend to see, especially with explosive teenagers, especially ones who became more challenging as they got older, is ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. So when you look at someone like Elon Musk or some very, very brilliant people, these are brilliant kids, But the challenge is they didn't come in with social norms, right? They didn't come in. You and I intuitively understand that when someone's sad, here's how you respond, or we can identify emotions and even nuance emotions. These kids can't. And when they're kids, everything's simple. Teacher's upset, they scream. Dad's upset, he looks frustrated. My friends hurt, they cry, right? I do good, I get rewarded. I do bad, I don't. Life is simple, even if you don't understand it. But then you shift into adolescence. And now when a girl smiles, she might actually be sad. And when dad says not to curse, he curses. And when my teacher says I'm doing good, I might not be doing good. Social media says do this, but people tell me to do that. My friend gets attention doing these horrible things. Maybe I should try that too, because that'll get me the attention. This is how I fit in. I got to do the crazy stuff to fit in because that's what gets the attention. I don't know how else to get the attention. Um, and as they shift into exactly the age you're describing, they get really frustrated because the rules are changing all around them. And when they think they're doing right, they're doing wrong and they don't know where to step and what to do. And so you start to see that really explosive behavior and parents try to throw medications at it, but that's not really the answer, right? The answer is to help them develop structure around their lives, understand what's going on. So that could be, one picture of it. And then you'd have one behavioral intervention. If it's something else, like a true mental health issue, bipolar depression, something like that, then medications may be the case. But bipolar and depression are two different things. Medications are two different medications. ADHD, right? Did it start all the way, as kids? Did it progress to teens? And then the medication for ADHD could be different. And ADHD is often very mixed with, it's the most commonly misdiagnosed diagnosis with autism spectrum disorder because they're very much the same. So the first step I would do is do, a meeting with parents and say, hey, talk to me. What's going on? How long has this been going on? What behaviors are repetitive? And then you start to see patterns. And then from there, you can sort of start the process. So it's hard for me to say, like, my 15-year-old is,
Yeah,
where do
it's
we
a
go
very
from there? It's like, well, it depends, right?
yeah. It's a very wide question, and I get that. I was just kind of,
Yeah.
you know, po picking your brain a little bit on that,
Well,
but
if you had history and I could ask you some questions or I asked the parents, then we could start to really, it doesn't take a long time to narrow it down. It could
yeah,
happen in 15 minutes,
well,
but it's just a matter of asking the right questions and seeing how aware they are of the answer.
yeah, and I don't know that specific
Sure.
details, but I guess you got another client that's gonna be contacting you. So that was easy. Yeah, you're
Sure.
good.
Boom.
Uh, what,
Okay.
I mean, what kinda got you into the space besides,
Uh,
having your own issues and stuff and working with somebody, but, I mean, to actually follow through?
Interesting question to actually follow through. So, um, I'm a musician, right? And I actually put together a band, and the therapy thing was the backup plan. When dad says like, "Hey, go to college, get your degree, just in
Yeah,
case."
yeah.
Um, so thank God I had a high enough IQ to get my grades done really quickly. And the minute I finished college, I bought an RV off of Craigslist, like the same one from like Breaking Bad, like a 1987
Yeah.
Fleetwood Southwind. And I recruited a band on Craigslist, which I guess was popular at the time. We painted the thing jet black and we went on tour, did like 70 tour dates over the summer.
Whoa.
And we got picked up by a producer working for Interscope, which is a record label. And we just drove out to California. I was in Maryland at the time and just like set up shop. Unfortunately, the gentleman passed away in the middle of the project and it tanked, as is
Yeah.
many of those stories. And I had to get a day job. So I went again to Craigslist. um, and I ended up finding a rehab. And I didn't know what rehabs were. When you picture rehab, you kind of think like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. If you don't know what it
Yeah.
is, you imagine it being something like really crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I needed a job. So I signed up. And I found that these were teenagers and they were of all walks of life with real challenges, but they weren't, walking around, exploding, talking to themselves with incurable, horrible challenges. Not that that's a bad thing. Obviously, there's other centers that can handle that, but these were kids that you really could make a difference. And so I did a good amount of work there and spent a good amount of my career working around that population.
Nice. And so, yeah, most of these kids, I mean, definitely not in your space, but I was in law enforcement and stuff. But it seems like a lot of the challenges are these kids are just misunderstood and not heard and not given the right direction to have an outlet for whatever their disorder or
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
And
So
law
it's
enforcement, by the way, is very interesting because I run treatment centers and some of our kids are on the spectrum, more explosive and have challenges. And they are conditioned to fear police. And actually, as part of our program, when kids get upset or things happen, you have to sometimes call 911 for help or different things like that. And eventually, we actually partnered with the police department, and they come out and they visit once or twice a week and hang out with the kids and talk to them, sort of take away that stigma. Because the reality is that police are the front lines. And the reality is, at least lately, they're dealing with teens primarily in many areas. Um, and if you can develop a relationship, working with teens is all about relationships. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talk about a therapist, like it's not like magic. It's not like, oh, I have this unique approach that like changes the kid, fixes the kid, right? It's about the relationship. That's it. So you could not be a therapist and develop a relationship and still change. And so I really like the way, at least lately, they've gotten a lot of training. There's a lot of mental health training for officers, a lot of community integration. So I think that's an amazing thing. I think law
Yeah.
enforcement is front line.
Yeah, it's coming along, but a lot of parents also use law enforcement as a hammer for their kid, and you show up and you're like, dude, I'm not here to parent for you, and so that becomes a problem. And um,
Yes,
yeah,
wasted resources and things like that.
t- totally, and it's very difficult because if you do have a out of control child, it's like, who's flailing around, then there's this liability where it's like you can only do so much without getting sued, and
Right. Correct.
and so it's
It's
a
tricky.
very challenging, yeah, it's very, very challenging. Um, man, so you're a CEO,
Yes.
and you're doing some work with people online. How did you kind of get into that field?
So I do a mix of online, but actually my company itself, the primary service, we actually have homes. And these homes are where kids live, up to 10 per home, and they have a chance to work through things. Like you mentioned, a lot of times in the house, things are not functional. Um, One of the key ways I can pick apart whether or not, for example, with kids on the spectrum is one simple question. You say they're explosive at home and you say they're flailing around and things are crazy. How are they at a friend's house?
Mm,
The answer is 10 times out of 10, they're perfect. They're fine. They're lovely. They're sweet because there's clarity at the friend's house as to what the rules are versus at home. But we get a lot of these kids because at home right now it's not functioning, right? For whatever reason. And we get to put them in a different environment that looks like home,
mhm.
where they can live with staff and they can try out skills and they can do chores and they can learn life skills but they have the therapeutic support they need. And simultaneously, you can work with the families to develop structure, to make sure the home is structured, to work through. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it in law enforcement. Like, if a kid is struggling, there's usually a really strong chance the parents have their own challenges.
Oh yeah.
And so you want to work with the parents also on learning things. I often tell parents who feel really guilty sometimes, like, I feel bad that my kid is suffering or it's my fault. I should have done X, Y, or Z. And I say, look, the number one thing you're struggling with is not your kid, it's guilt. And you have to understand that your kids, they didn't like come out with like a book to tell you what to do. There was no instruction manual that came with them. So a lot of parents just don't have the answers, right? You can't feel
Yeah.
guilty about that. You just got to get educated. So my job has primarily been working with teens and educating families.
So you're doing like you also have an inpatient clinic. How long
Correct.
are people generally kids usually staying with you? Is it just very depending on the kid, or is there
It,
kind of a
it, it
set?
varies depending on the kid. Well, there's two elements. Obviously, it varies depending on the kid. But if a kid comes to a center and they are struggling to the extent that they need a center, it's not going to be a 30-day stint, right? You're talking minimum 90 days. But sometimes they need more. We've had kids with us for a year. It just depends on the situation, each kid's needs. The goal is that they don't come back,
Yeah.
right? The goal is that this is a stop along a journey and one that you hopefully forget and move on with your life. And so, it varies based off the kid, based off the situation, based off the family, and then we kind of go from there.
What type of kids wind up? I mean, obviously they're troubled and struggling. Is there kind of a, I don't know, a box that these specific kids that are staying with you are the kind of issues they're dealing with, or is it all over the place?
It's a good question. I'd say it's all over the place, but let me see. It's a big box. There's still a box, but it's much bigger than people would think. Generally speaking, a key indicator of a kid needing something like this is that they cannot function outside of a structured environment. So, could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be aggression, it could be, like I said, it could be spectrum, it could be bipolar, it could be severe family conflict. It can be a number of things. Obviously, it can be addiction. So the big box that incorporates that is that. Now, if you have a kid who's schizophrenic, if you have kids with more severe forms of psychosis that can't be treated in a short term intervention location, then those are kind of outside the box.
Do you generally start with these guys online and then, and then bring them to the facility, or, you kind of do both things. So is there
Right.
like a starting point and then it progresses to progresses to the facility, or
Also a good question. So personally, as a psychotherapist, I have my own practice. I see people in the home, I see people online. And when you talk about online, you're talking about someone who is not as acute, right? If you can be online and again, be safe in an environment that isn't structured, then you don't need it. And always your goal is, least restrictive level of care, right? You don't want kids locked up forever. A lot of parents come in like, just take my kid, bring them back when they're 18, or they send them to like lockdown boarding schools. And you've seen the Paris Hilton, you've seen a lot of those stories about those places. They basically just drop off their kids and hopefully they hope things go well. And I'm not a proponent of it, but
yeah.
um, if they're online, then they're doing okay. If they begin to escalate beyond the point that they can be managed online, then you refer them to a higher level of care. But there are still levels between being in a residential and being in an outpatient. There's kind of middle levels where you can go for a few hours a day, a few days a week. So it kind of escalates and then you can step back down depending on how you're doing.
Are your facilities nationwide, or are they just in specific states?
So I lived in California at the time. I'm back in Maryland after stopping in Florida during COVID.
Okay.
But I opened in Las Vegas
Oh,
at the
right on.
time. It was just a 25-minute flight. It made sense. They didn't have a lot of resources, so all my locations are centralized there. And unfortunately, even with the amount of facilities we have, it's not enough. We do get people from around the country that fly in, but yeah, our central locations are there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. I'm thinking about
The
our
future.
situation, or not. It's a situation, and
Yeah.
and it's kind of like, at what point do those parents go, okay, enough is enough. We've tried everything. We've tried medication and all this stuff. Now we need to take this next step. Like, do you have to convince these parents, or they're just ready to do it on their own?
Both ways. Sometimes I have parents who are like, "Get him the heck out of here." I'm like, "There's so many things we can do first, right? Do you really want to lock your kid up? Like, let's give them a chance to try their skills. You haven't done X, Y, or Z. I know you've done the medication, you've done a lot of things, but you really haven't done the core things that need to happen, right?" Then I have other parents who I'm like, "This kid needs to go. He's flipped a car. He's put people in danger. He needs to go somewhere you can't control this." And I'm like, "Well, I love my kid. I don't want to send there. He's going to be upset. I don't want him to be upset at me. I want him to stay my friend." And you're like, "We don't want to be your friend." And so it goes on both sides of the spectrum. And then you have parents in the middle who are just confused and with a little bit of guidance still decide, which path makes sense.
And one last question on this, just
Oh, of course, go as many
uh,
questions as you want.
yeah, I mean, if in my particular case, this isn't the case, but I'm thinking from a law enforcement standpoint. Um, if the kid is kind of violent or has had violent tendencies, um, do you have staff to handle that, or is that not the facility for them?
So it depends on the level of violent activities, right? A kid who's
Yeah,
frustrated and punches a wall, pretty
yeah,
common.
yeah.
A kid who another kid gets in his face and they get in a fight, pretty common.
Yeah.
But a kid who gets really aggressive to the point of, turning things into weapons or severely hurting people or kind of getting out of control, then those wouldn't be a fit. And sometimes we get those. And sometimes law enforcement has to come because that's what has to happen. And then they don't come back. And we refer them to, obviously want to refer them to something, not just put them out, but we're just not the place for that.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
If it gets to that point, they're going to juvenile hall or something like that.
And
I
sometimes we get them from juvenile hall. We get some of the kids who actually have done their time and are willing to give it a shot because, quite frankly, it's the better option. But yeah, in the other case, they'll head head in the other direction.
Man, so you said a musician, but you have 5 kids of your own, you know?
Yeah.
That's gotta be a handful. I have 2. I am one of 5 kids, from
Oh,
my parents.
nice.
So, yeah, big family, and it's juggling a lot. Do they kinda manage themselves while you're working on your career?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're parenting, but,
Mhm.
that's a
No,
A lot of kids to keep track.
Well, I'm the oldest of 11.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah. So I know the thing about big families. And to some extent with big families, the oldest, me, learns to take care of the kids under them. And it's sort of an interesting process. But, I have a partner in what we do and she's amazing. I work to bring in the funding and she works to help keep the house, and the kids on track. But it is a challenge. And it's even more of a challenge when, you're not present. I've been working this for 15 years. And as of lately, I'm like, you know what? I probably should be more present. My kids are becoming teenagers. And you lose track of that really quickly. And I'm grateful that in my field, I can see what happens when you lose track of that. And so as of late, I've really taken a step back. And the question always becomes, do I want to invest my time in helping somebody else's kid to the detriment of mine? And that's always the question that sits in my head if I take on a case or if I have to do things, I try to calculate that now. Okay, is this going to take me away from my own obligations? And that question really has to live in your head, especially if you're in my profession.
Yeah, yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, that's kind of why I started doing this. I don't know where it's going. It's been growing, quite good.
Yeah,
I've only been doing it
you
since
got good
October.
ratings.
Yeah, I don't know where, out of nowhere, I've done it for 4 months, and my first video was trash, and I'm getting a little better, but uh,
Yeah.
it's growing. But I'm in the same boat. I'm gone all the time, and I have two little ones, and I want to be there for them because I don't want them to wind up in your facility. No offense,
No, no,
but
no. It's not
yeah,
offensive. It's exactly how you should be thinking.
yeah, and so, I'm just jumping all in on this and working like a banshee.
Man, it's a blessing to be able to do that. Some people don't have a choice, right? They have to do what they have to do to survive. And, the people who are in a position to be able to do that, should take advantage of that, and blessings like, okay, cool. I can do this now and survive and try to build something where I can drive my own income from while being present for my family.
Yeah. So what's kind of the, biggest challenge as a mental health professional, like, from the, the business and, just profession side of things? If somebody's, like, thinking about getting into this business, what kind of warnings would you give them or encouragement?
Do you have enough time?
I got all the time in the world, man.
Um, no, uh, I'll give you a couple off the top of my head. Number one, two-thirds of the people get into the profession of therapy are doing so because they had trouble in their lives. And that's the wrong reason to do it. Because they're trying to work out their own issues and eventually they get burned out because they are so emotionally invested because of their own challenges that they can't set appropriate boundaries. The number one um, indicator of a good therapist is boundaries. You have to be able to hold those boundaries. You have to be able to kind of maintain structure because if you don't, you're toast. And if you don't, you'll break ethical rules. And if you don't, you'll be so involved that you'll lose the respect, you'll lose the control, you'll become part of the process. So, first question is, why do I want to do it? And because of burnout, I'd say almost half of therapists who go into therapy end up doing something else because it's just not, it wasn't what they thought it would be. Everyone pictures that the fancy office and the waterfall behind it and the person sitting in the chair with your notebook, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like that. It really isn't. You can get there toward the end of your career. You can do it for a while, but it's really not where most people's careers take them. The second piece is, financial, right? It's not easy to sustain yourself, right? Therapists can make $250 an hour, but not everyone does. And a lot of times you work with a client and they go over their hours and you only have a certain amount of time in the day and there's a lot of competition. So it is a challenge to develop your practice. A lot of people assume you roll out, you get a bunch of clients, now you're off to the races, and it's not true. A lot of them get involved in insurance, which is a good way to build clientele more rapidly. But insurance has challenges, right? They don't
Yeah.
pay on time, or they deny claims, or suddenly you find out that they weren't covered at all. Um, so the second piece, besides knowing that you need to be in it for the right reasons, is that you got to plan for what that looks like financially. The third one is knowing that you have to have tough skin
Mhm.
because you're dealing with people with mental health issues. And you have to recognize that. So, sometimes you get insulted by somebody. Sometimes people will shout at you. Sometimes people will criticize you, that post horrible things online. But you always have to take into context, I can't respond to this person the way I would respond to other people because this is a symptom of the very issue I'm trying to treat, right? A lot of times my staff, the ones who aren't a fit for the center, will say, oh, this kid's too intense. We need to send them out. or this kid cursed me out, like, we got to get rid of them. Like, you want to get rid of a kid for expressing the very same symptoms for which they're here for. Like, let's recognize this. We treat mental health issues.
Yeah.
So them expressing their mental health issues is not a problem. Now, if there's a safety concern, like we talked about, fine. But a kid being a punk or saying wrong things to you or insulting you, and it's like, okay, recognize what this is. And so as a mental health professional, you have to know, and I'm sure as in law enforcement, it's just very similar. Like, you're dealing with people with challenges, and they're going to act challenged. So for me, those three are kind of the top, and then other ones like we talked about are time management, family management, and kind of recognizing your competencies. I see too many therapists who are like, I treat these 53 disorders. And you're like, well, yes, but you really should have a focus because, it isn't as simple as like, I sit in a seat and we talk, right? A lot of them, like, well, we'll just sit in a session, it's an hour and we'll talk. When I get therapists to our centers, right, we bill insurance. Insurance isn't going to pay anything if they don't understand what you're doing. So if you write, I talked to the kid for an hour and they cried and we talked about some family stuff. It's like, what did you do?
Yeah.
What was the intervention? Okay. There was depression. We worked on a certain intervention to deal with the depression. We set homework to work on it afterwards. A lot of therapists don't even understand what they're doing. They come into a session and it's like, we're going to talk and then we'll talk again next week. And they start to get better over time. And that's not the case. So being competent and having a focused level of competency is a huge portion. I can go on for an hour, but those are like, those are my top 5, I guess,
Right.
is what I would say.
Right on. You covered it. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I do have another
Sure.
kind of area. So I was in the military, law enforcement. I don't know if you've seen some of my stuff, but I suffered from PTSD, depression, anxiety for 15, 20 years. And so I took all the medications, I did all the things, and nothing really helped it. And so, nowadays, I went into psychedelics. I did ayahuasca, and it literally was like a light switch for me. I mean, it changed everything for me. Obviously, children can't do that, you know.
Right.
So in the areas you guys are working on are very successful, but I just kind of want to get your thoughts on, at least. And this psychedelics, they're not for just general, maybe they are, but not for general depression and stuff like that, but for
Sure.
really bad PTSD, these Navy SEAL guys and, people who've been through really horrific,
Sure.
traumatic stuff. Um, what's kind of your take on that psychedelics?
Oh, okay. So it's a loaded question. I'll start with, obviously, like you said, teenagers. No. And even things like marijuana, people are like, well, marijuana, I smoked when I was a kid. Like the marijuana of today is not the stuff you smoked as a kid. It's not.
Yeah.
Further, you don't know what's in it nowadays. And even things like, for instance, spice, which is not, it's like a synthetic mock-up, I guess, of THC that kids take. Like, you're having psychotic breaks in kids. You're having early induced schizophrenia in kids. There's studies out of UCLA. The prefrontal cortex is still developing. It stops that from developing. It slows you down. So even the adults who say, well, pot's okay, it's never okay for a kid. Not until
No,
they're at least 18 to 21, purely for the physical symptom.
25 is what I've heard.
Even more,
Yeah.
even more.
Yeah.
But there are very practical outcomes that are not good, that have been proven, that have been studied as it pertains to young people. So obviously there is a no-brainer. Also, when you deal with substances like marijuana, everyone says, well, it's not a gateway drug. You're right. Marijuana is not a gateway drug, but it does do the job of filling in something, right? You're taking it because it does something for you. It covers something. It fills a void. It calms your anxiety. It allows you to get out of your depression. If it is filling a void, eventually it doesn't become strong enough.
Mhm.
And so then you get something else to fill the void. So marijuana, I would say marijuana does not lead people to heroin. But
Yeah.
I promise you, every single heroin addict you meet out there started with marijuana,
Yeah,
right? So it's
absolutely.
not that it leads to it, but it's whatever you're using it for continues to grow. And obviously, when you talk about PTSD and things like that, it's very similar, right? A lot of people use this thing to mask the problem. And when that's not enough, you take something else to mask the problem and something else to mask the problem. But the problem itself isn't addressed. And that's sort of, for me, a key differentiator when we talk about psychedelics. Psychedelics are relatively unstudied,
Mhm.
right? We're just starting to kind of get into that. And we're not even talking about ayahuasca. We're talking about,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
MDMA and
MDMA
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
shrooms, or some people are even doing ketamine. And they're actually, you have a nurse there and there's an injection and it's an 8-hour process. The question is a psychedelic helping you escape from a problem, or is it helping you address a problem? Some people use psychedelics in a method to get people to release, their subconscious barriers and work through things, right? So when you're a little high, and they can kind of get you to talk through things and come to some conclusions with the right person,
Yep.
right? You can't just take psychedelics and be like, cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I've met people who call themselves practitioners who have no license,
Yep.
no experience, and they lead sessions with people on psychedelics. And I'm like, you can just mess people up for life. Like, you
Oh, sure.
cannot open that Pandora's box if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
for me, without it being proven and without the proper skills, which people have yet to develop around this, it's scary.
Mhm.
That's what I'll say. And without knowing whether or not you're going to address the problems, it's scary. So for me, at the moment, until it's really well studied and well rounded with not just studies, but time, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times, like, we had people, like soldiers were taking meds. That's where it came from. And we're like, oh, this is cool. It gives them
Yeah,
energy. It was great.
it's
And then
great for
5 years
war.
later, right? The 5 years later, you have all these addicts. Like, oh shoot, I didn't know. The same thing with with Oxy, right? In the 90s, it was pushed as like the thing.
Yep.
It was like, it's not addictive. It's great. It relieves pain. Turns out it's massively addictive.
Mhm.
So you needed time to see that. So I need study and I need time, neither of which we have right
Yeah.
now. When it comes to ayahuasca specifically, I have an even bigger challenge, and I'm not questioning that it was a good process for you.
Yeah, yeah.
For people with mental health issues, ayahuasca has contributed to a significant amount of mental breaks
Mhm.
because of how intense it is. And so some people walk out with a realization, some people walk out as a vegetable. And so for me, that's terrifying.
Yeah,
The second thing is, especially young people, it depends where you had your ayahuasca experience, right?
for sure.
People are going off to Peru and to other places. And most of those people, A, are not trained, B, will take advantage of you. And you have young women who are getting raped in the middle of
Yep.
sessions. You have people disappearing. You have some really horrible experiences. And it's very hard to find like a clinic where you can be safely monitored taking ayahuasca. So
Yeah,
there are, I'm sure, but it's very hard to find. And so
for
the
sure.
majority of people who hear about ayahuasca, even the celebrities, go off to another country
Yep.
and take
Yeah.
massive risks. So ayahuasca, like, there's psychedelics, which I'm so questionable about. And then on top of that is ayahuasca, where I'm like really questionable about.
Yeah, that
But it depends.
I would jump in and just say, like, so I went to Costa Rica and I went to it's literally the only licensed medically licensed facility for ayahuasca, licensed by the, Costa Rican
Sure.
government, so
Yeah.
take that for what you will. I
Sure.
I think they're doing a really good job there, and they're helping people, but yes, everything you were saying, like, people going into, Colombia and all these jungles, yeah, you don't know what you're getting yourself into, and
Yep.
yeah, it's a crazy experience, and if you're not ready for it, some of the stuff even I saw, it was like, holy shit,
Right.
scary is scary,
Right.
and, you know, part of me
You
is
you
like, "Oh,
you you
shit,
did
am
it
I
right.
having a mental break?" But
Right.
th
Exactly. But you did it with supervision. You
Yep.
did it in a safe environment. And yes, maybe it's the Costa Rican government licensing it, but at least there's some sort of supervision and oversight, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are how many of those exist, right? And
No,
how many of
I think
those
that's the only one.
probably, and I'm guessing they didn't bill insurance.
No,
So
no, it's cash pay, but they have I mean, they have therapists on site,
right,
medical people on site,
right.
just, like, it is top
Right, but
notch.
so there's an affordability piece is what I'm saying also for
Absolutely,
some
yeah.
people. But with your ex-military experience, you probably could have gone to Peru as well and defended
Oh, yeah.
yourself just fine.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
yeah,
but
now
yeah,
I might think about it. Before then, I'm like, "Hell no, I'm not going
yeah,
into
yeah,
the jungle and doing this,"
right. Yeah,
So,
yeah. But no, I'm with it, and clearly for you, the results panned out. It's
yeah.
just for a lot of people, it's drawing straws, and for me, that's a challenge.
For sure. Definitely not for everybody. I don't
Correct.
this isn't medical advice. I would never recommend anybody to go down there and do
Right.
ayahuasca, but, it did, on the veteran side of things and, you know, first responders, it really did
Sure.
help me. But the VA is doing a little bit of doing studies with MDMA and some other stuff, and hopefully that'll kind of come around
And,
and
and PTSD
help
is
people.
hell. I lived in California, and I probably think 75% of the homeless people on the streets were veterans,
Yeah.
right? And they're obviously heroin is a lot worse than ayahuasca. So to some extent, you pick your battles for a soldier, but
Yeah.
you pick your poison, I guess is the better word. But you know, PTSD is a huge thing and a huge contributor. You see the bravest people in the world, the people who've lived to defend everyone, living on the street in a tent, and it's a really horrible experience for them, and to feel as somebody in this country, like, okay, this feels horrible and I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
They're
it's
resistant to help even.
Yeah, it's that's the problem. There is help available to these guys. They just don't. They're so far gone, they don't even know where to start. It's
Correct.
like, how are you going to tell a dude under a bridge, like, oh, go down to the VA and sign up and bring all your paperwork? Man, you got a
Right.
cardboard box you're living in, and
Right.
so we got to catch these guys before they get,
Exactly.
get out of the military. Show them, some of the stuff
Yeah.
that's available to them. So
And the military is becoming wiser to it. I mean, we're
it
seeing it
is.
more and more. So that's good.
Yeah. So any parents out there watching or, considering reaching out to you or reaching out to somebody to try to get extra help, like how do they go about it? What advice and how do they get a hold of you?
Well, me, I have a website, um, both for my private practice and obviously if I need to refer them, I'd refer them to the company. Mine is mendibaron.com, my name. And the company, if rehab is needed, is called Mariah Health. So it's MORIAH health.com. But I would say if you're a parent, the best thing you can do is find somebody who knows, right? Don't assume you know. Don't be ashamed to ask for help. There are experts. There are people who know what they're doing. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be Mariah, but ask for help. Don't assume that you know it. Don't be ashamed. They didn't come with a manual, like we talked about. And asking for help could be the single best thing you do for your kid.
Right on. Mindy, man, I appreciate you chatting with me today. And I don't want to take up too much of your times, but it really very informative. And I appreciate what you're doing for everybody, for our country and for humanity, man.
I appreciate you as well, my friend, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Take care. Have a good one.